Of course, I have promised that I will be, because of the popularity of the section on Vinay and Darbelnet, the procedures with it, which are 7, and under direct translation and oblique translation. Under the direct translation, you have 3, we have 3, which are borrowing, calque, and literal translation. And under the oblique translation, which is the indirect, when there is the message you cannot convey, then you go for the oblique translation, which is a strategy. And under that strategy, there are 4 procedures, which are modulation, transposition, modulation, equivalence, and adaptation. In this episode, or in this recording, that I will be talking about some examples or samples that can explain these procedures and how they work, in particular in Arabic, but in French as well. The French is mostly by Vinay and Darbelnet, and the English, of course, by them, most of it. But I've added some English ones and their equivalent in Arabic as well, to make it absolutely clear what they mean by these procedures and how they are using them. Now, with regards to the direct translation, as we can see here, in a direct translation, there are 3 procedures: borrowing, calque, and literal translation. And of course, in these 3 different procedures, each one we see what happens in the lexis with regards to the words and how they are translated, with regards to the structures and how they are kept or changed, and with regards to the message. Now, for example, the word bulldozer, which is in English, it stays in French and in Arabic. That is a borrowing. Fuselage, which is from French, is kept in the English, and even the pronunciation is kept. Fuselage, in both English and French and Arabic. And debut, which is a French word used in English, if you translate it as debut in Arabic as well, in other words, transliterate it, then it is borrowing. Then we'll move on to the structure, where science fiction is kept as it is in terms of structure and has become science fiction, which is the same structure. À la mode, which needs an accent in French, from French, of course. À la mode is the same as in French and English, same structure. And in Arabic, al-moda, or ala al-moda. Of course, if we are to translate it differently, we say fashionable. And we translate it differently. But here, ala mode in English and in Arabic. And ala al-moda in Arabic, which is a transliteration, becomes Arabization in a way, because there's no d in French, but it's written moda in Arabic. And Secretary General, of course, is Secrétaire l'Am. It's half of it transliterated and half borrowing and half translated literally. Or that's what's happened with the Secretary General, a secretary, and General l'Am. You can say General, Secretary General, which will be very full borrowing in Arabic. Of course, in French, Secrétaire Général. Secrétaire Général. I did not mention it here. Then we move on to the next one under message, bon voyage, in English used, though it's from French. So it's bon voyage, and in Arabic, bon voyage. So this is what's called borrowing. I hope everybody understands what borrowing is, which is transliteration. Transference according to Catford. Calc is the second one, which means you translate and you keep just the same kind of meaning or structure to it. Economically reliable, economique viable, اقتصاديا معتمد عليه. Normal school, école normale, المدرسة العادية بمعنى التعليم العام, means continuing education. Then we move on to the structure under Calc, Lucia Palace, and if you translate it in French, Lucia Palais, the same structure. Governor General is Gouverneur Général, which is also the same structure, Al-Hakim al-General. If we translate it that way, then we are keeping it to the or Al-Hakim al-Am, we can say as well. Al-Hakim al-Am, better even, because if we say Al-Hakim al-Am is better than Hakim al-General, there's an error I made here. It should be Al-Hakim al-Am. Then season compliments, season compliments, the word compliments has got a mistake in it. It should be an N, compliments, nt. And compliment de la saison, which is tahani al-mawsim. Actually, let me, I will fix it in another document about compliment. Should be compliment. And al-Hakim al-Am. The next one along is relating to literal translation. Now that means that you are respecting the target language grammar and idioms. Here we have ink, ankr, al-hibr. You see the word al-hibr. We have added the because in Arabic you can't say ink. You have to say the ink. So that is following the target language culture or grammar. Then you have a start, debut, أول ظهور as a lexis. But if in terms of structure, the book is on the table. Le livre est sur la table. الكتاب فوق الطاولة. You can see it's a very Arabic structure. احترام التركيبة العربية. What time is it? Quelle heure est-il? ما الوقت? Then Secretary General, Secrétaire Général, Al-Amin al-Am. This is the actual literal translation of Secretary General, Al-Amin al-Am. So here we've translated both words and we kept to the respecting the adjective that comes after the noun in Arabic, whereas in English, in French, it comes after, and in English, it comes after. Secretary General, it's actually from French. It's the way it is organized in French. But this is what's commonly used. Then Merry Christmas, Ayadu Miladin Saida. And that is a literal translation. So that we have finished the direct translation in this particular example. And this particular table is actually Vinay and Darbelnet. Most of the words are done by them in French and English, but I've added the Arabic on top to explain more. And I've added a few extra examples that are not in the Vinay in their translation or in their article about the stylistics of Arabic and English. Move on to the next strategy, which is the strategy called oblique translation. An oblique translation, that is when the message is not conveyed properly. You go for this strategy, oblique translation. Under this strategy, there are four different procedures: transposition, modulation, equivalence, and adaptation. And now, under transposition, for example, the word from in English, expéditeur in French, and ابتداء in Arabic. That will be a transposition. Under structure, for example, as timber becomes more valuable, and in French, depuis la valorisation or gestion des bois, and that is bois, des bois. منذ ارتفاع سعر الخشب منذ ارتفاع سعر الخشب. This is a kind of translation where there is a kind of transposition in the Arabic. Then we move on under transposition. We find the word no smoking, translated in French is défense de fumier, fume, which means ممنوع التدخين, no smoking allowed. And that is a transposition. Also another example, what's the time or what time is it? Quelle heure est-il? If we translate it, كم الساعة? كم الساعة? We should have put a full stop there or exclamation mark. كم الساعة? We should have put an exclamation mark here. Then the next example is about modulation. For the procedures is modulation. This, for example, at the lexis level, word level, vocabulary level, you have shallow in English. In French is peu profond, which means قليل العمق. If we translate the word shallow not as ضحل, but as قليل العمق, then we have made what's called modulation. We have modulated it. We have changed it slightly. Another example which is related here to the structure of the actual sentence, give a pint of your blood. Translated, donnez un peu de votre sang. تبرع بقليل من دمك. تبرع بقليل من دمك, which is modulation, because you have changed it slightly in order to make it modulated slightly. For a start, also is another example of the structure. Pour un début, which is debut, which is بادئ ذي البدء. That is a modulation. We have modulated the English and changed it slightly in some way. Then under messages, vacancies and complet. If we translate vacancies and complet, as in hotel, for example, it can be in Arabic changed. You can say ما في غرف فاضية or ما في شواغر. Depends on if it is chairs or seats or positions. ما في شواغر. Or complet means full. In this kind of translation, you have modulated it slightly. Then another example under message, which is under the using modulation as a procedure and under the strategy of oblique translation, is safe journey or have a safe journey. And bon voyage, which is in French, and in Arabic, رافقتك السلامة. Merry Christmas, if it's to be translated according under modulation, then it is Joyeux Noël, and تهنئة بالعيد. And that will be a modulation, which is changing it slightly, but giving the same meaning here. Then we move on to the sixth procedure, which is equivalence. Now, under equivalence, if we are saying T in the military sense or in the military service, usually they use the word T in the UK, in Britain, and in America, they chew, and chew is an equivalent to T, but it's not exactly a translation of T. La soup is the French, and in Arabic, al-akl أو الطعام, as used in the army, في الجيش. يعني just كلمة أكل أو طعام. Another equivalence, because there is no equivalence to it, you can't translate it as chew, or you can't translate the word tea, or you can't translate the word la soup. But you give an equivalent in the target culture. Another example under the sentence, and this is here just a well-known idiom, like a bull in a china shop. And of course, the word China here does not mean China as in the country. China means here, it means glassware and very ceramics, and the ceramics that are used as ornaments. Like a bull in a china shop, so these ornaments in a shop that's very small, and there is a bull which coming in, it could break all these china little things. Like a bull in a china shop. Now the translation of that according to equivalence, if we are using that procedure, equivalence, then it has to be, the equivalence will be comme un chien dans un jeu de quilles, which means a dog with some skittles. But then the Arabic would be قام الدب ليرقص قتل 4 أشخاص أو قتل 4 أنفس. So it's really, it means that it is a very clumsy person, but you are using a similar culturally equivalent expression. It means أهوج, clumsy. مثل ثور أهوج. حاجة مثل ثور أهوج. Then we, of course, if you can't translate it that way, you have to translate it as قام الدب ليرقص قتل 4 أنفس or أشخاص. Then another under equivalence is hollow triumph, which can be translated as Chateau de Carte, to cart. And that is in Arabic أوهن من بيت العنكبوت, will be another expression that gives the same idea, but in different way of saying the words and different expression, well known in the target language, in the culture. Another example under equivalence, according to Vinay and Darbelnet again, which is Merry Christmas, which can be translated as كل عام وأنتم بخير, Happy New Year. And this way, it's an equivalence to the English, or to the English Merry Christmas. Of course, you can say Joyeux Noël, which is also an equivalence, could be an equivalence a little bit. But it's more of a modulation than equivalence, because it does exist in the target language in French, but it does not exist as much in the Arabic one. Another example under the structure, and here we are talking about the under the structure, is as timber becomes more valuable. Depuis de la valorisation de points مع ارتفاع أسعار المحروقات. Again, here with the rise of the prices of fuels, here it is an equivalent being used here, so the equivalence procedure is used according to Vinay and Darbelnet. And finally, adaptation, and that is where it's not really there at all, and it does not mean it does not exist somehow in the target language at all, as in the case of adaptation. Here's an example under Lexis. In the UK, it's very popular to play cricket, but in the US, it's very popular to play play baseball. But in France, it's very popular to do cycling. Cyclism will be the equivalent of cricket and the equivalent of baseball. And in Arabic, the most popular or common game is كرة القدم, football. Under the sentence, before you could say Jack Robinson, you could say Jack Robinson. In English or in French, un, clean d'oil, which means in the blink of the eye, literally. But of course, when you translate it into Arabic, because it's not from the English, it's not known if you say, before you could say Jack Robinson, قبل أن تقول Jack Robinson. It doesn't mean anything. You have to say على جناح السرعة, speedily. Then we have bon appetit, and bon appetit in English and in French, it's known both in English and French, but in Arabic, you have to adapt it and you use it a completely different thing, and that is بالهنا والعافية أو بالهنا والشفا when you're eating. I hope these examples have actually explained all these procedures that are done by Vinay and Darbelnet in 1958, which was translated in 1995. And I have added to them the Arabic to clarify some points, and some of the examples are actually used from the actual table which was used by Vinay and Darbelnet, but I've added some in the Arabic, and I've added extra information and extra little things here and there in order to make it clearer for my audience. Thank you.